to put together. It's quite an interesting topic, decision making, and if any of you haven't sort of done much Googling or looking at research on this topic, it's really quite interesting, and particularly in recent times with what's happened with the pandemic and how it really has changed things. And so that's sort of what we're going to be talking about today. Is I think just quickly, I'm Greg Bull. Today I've got some of the Coxon team online, in particular Lane and Jonathan, I think, will be monitoring the chat box. And so if you have any questions or comments, that would be great. I have a quick survey question that I will ask in a moment, and then we're going to talk some information about decision making. So today's agenda is, as I said before, that the COVID pandemic has really, I think, changed the way a lot of organisations were making decisions and changed things up a bit. And what this forced them to do is make big, good decisions and quickly. And so we're going to look at that. How do you make high-quality decisions and fast? And then it's one thing talking about it. The next thing is how do you as an organisation set yourself up to be able to do that? What are some things you need to think about from an organisation perspective and also from a personal perspective? So with that, I'm going to do a quick survey just to really understand on the line what are some of the decision-making styles that we have. Now, there's no right or wrong on this, and I'll just get this survey up and running. If you could just select the choice that best matches your decision style. So there's no right or wrong. So are you an intuitive decision maker? You rely heavily on your gut feel. Are you an evidence-based decision maker? So you like to have the numbers, the facts, the figures, and then you get quite uncomfortable when you don't have those numbers available. Or are you more, I guess, collegiate or collaborative in your decision making and seeking the views and opinions of others in terms of making that decision and saying, okay, well, that's the majority view, or a lot of people think this is what do we do that? We're getting some good answers here. We've got some intuitive decision makers, so some evidence-based decision makers. Yeah, someone's decided that they had to ask a few people first to say, am I a collegiate or collaborative decision maker? And the consensus was that you were. I'm not sure who made that. I'm just pulling your leg, but yes, so that's good. So I'll give it another moment or two. It'd be good if everyone could put a response in. Would be fantastic. How would I be? I'm probably largely I'm a mix, I think, between evidence-based and intuitive, but I probably lean towards the evidence-based, I would say, personally as well. So there's any more coming in, so I'll end the voting. So we'll just share those results. So we have, as suspected, most of us are evidence-based. We have some intuitive decision makers, and we have a more collegiate decision maker amongst us as well. So, as I said, there's no right or wrong. I think that the key to this is really being aware of what your decision-making style is, and then what the pros and cons and what your biases might be, and how that might influence your decision-making moving forward. Someone who's had to make a lot of decisions, I would imagine, is Obama. And I love this quote here: "Nothing comes to my desk that is perfectly solvable. Otherwise, someone else would have solved it." So you wind up dealing with probabilities. And I think that's an important thing to think about in the topic we're talking about. The theme of today is about how do we make decisions with imperfect data. And so if you look at this, Obama making some very big decisions with the expectation that maybe he's only going to be 30 to 40% chance he's going to be wrong. And so it's about being comfortable with that. I think it's an important word, being comfortable with being able to make decisions and that aren't 100% right. So if we think about the majority of us on the call are evidence-based decision makers, so we need to think about what does that mean for us in terms of decision making, and how does that help? And then what do I need to do? And then you need to be comfortable with decision making, but not paralyzed not to make a decision because you don't have enough evidence or don't think you have enough evidence to make that decision. And we'll talk about that as we move through. As I said, if you have any comments, it'd be great if you could add those to the chat box. Lane and Jonathan, I think, are monitoring that. So I think one of the things that we've really learned and we've observed, if you've been paying much attention to the media, is that the pandemic response has really shone a light on how decision-making, how slow decision-making was in the past. So it had become something inefficient. And however, what it really did highlight was when push came to shove and when we were forced to, big decisions could be made quickly. Bureaucracy and the fear of being wrong was replaced by the fear of doing nothing at all. And so there's many quotes around to say, you've got to keep moving forward. It became really real that the urgency of the situation meant that we had to do something. And we particularly saw that things like moving to remote working, and we'll talk a little bit later on about remote working, is those decisions happened very quickly. Whereas in the past, there was a lot of umming and ahhing, should we or shouldn't we? But when push came to shove, we had to do it. We made the decisions. And a lot of the decisions were made were directionally right, without that right amount of data. So why has decision-making become slow, risk-averse, and driven by fear of failure, not fear of flavour? There are many sided reasons for this. I think one of the main ones is, particularly for larger decisions, or decisions that may have a number of stakeholders or maybe a dominant party, is a lack of really robust debate around, particularly at the start, is directionally we're going this way, and opinions of view of maybe one or two people or a particular charismatic leader or whoever, and there isn't necessarily an environment where we can challenge those situations. So we're not getting really good, robust debates. And what that then means is there's an overemphasis on the data and the analysis, and we haven't, as I said, really aligned on the purpose, or should we or shouldn't we make a decision in the first place. We then devolve into going into taking too much time and effort and debating it later on. When we're trying to make the decision, we're debating the whys and wherefores rather than debating at the start, at the front, of what is the right direction, what is the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. Many organisations have quite convoluted decision-making processes, and these can actually slow you down, particularly for big decisions, particularly where there are a number of stakeholders involved, or even to the point where some decisions might be quite easy to make, but we get quite dogmatic about the process. And actually following the step-by-numbers approach of the process means that, yes, we could make a decision, but we need to go through the process, and the process actually slows us down because actually it might be quite a simple or easy decision. Consensus is a challenge. So does everyone agree? Or even to the point where if there are many people involved and we have different expertise, is people's expertise going beyond, they're making decisions beyond their expertise. So if I'm a lawyer, am I making decisions on marketing? And surely I should really be focused on the legal aspects of the thing. And so those consensus decision making and committees actually slow things down. Sometimes in just the personalities involved, but also just in the process of getting people together, coordinating those committees to make decisions, and people having to essentially sit through the same presentation multiple times whilst others formulate their views and opinions. Today we are inundated with data, and so having too much data can slow us down. So for a lot of evidence-based decision makers is, are we trying to boil the ocean? Are we trying to get a better data set? Are we trying to get more information to prove us right before we can make a decision? Or in some instances, are we not sure if we want to make the decision, so we keep asking for more information just to be sure, and so that slows us down. A real big one, I think, is lack of empowerment, and this cuts both ways, is people not making decisions that they've been delegated to, they're pushing back up the line, or similarly, decisions that could be made at a lower level in organisation being kept at a higher level for I guess, over-controlling type purposes, and that also can slow things down because a lot of these decisions aren't happening as and when they should. And particularly at times, in recent times, particularly times of crisis even, is often there are decisions made that all decisions have to be made at higher levels, and so things don't happen and don't take place. So you need to think about, start thinking about some of the reasons that slow decision making down, and how in your organisation are they impacting your decision making, and what can we do about those? So I think the pandemic provided a primer in some aspects as to how fast decision making can be made. As I said before, at its height, big decisions were being made with limited, mostly imperfect data that needed to be made because we were moving in the right direction. So the thought process is think about what we did and how do we apply some of that in what hopefully one day be more normal times, but the times now are probably more normal than they were when this first came. We're much more familiar with what we're doing. In uncertain times and making faster, agile decisions, I think you need to be, there needs to be a preparedness and as part of the decision-making process, an expectation that things will change and that we're going to need to pivot. And so agile organizations, that they have that. And so the decisions are made with a point that we know we're going to have to change, and we move on and go and move forward. What enables them to do that is that they have a mindset that enables them to be comfortable with the decisions that they're making. They know the direction right. They know that enough data is there, and they know that yes, we'll make these decisions. This is heading in the direction we want to go, and we know that we will need to iterate and change. And so often in an agile organization, that is the way that we do things, is we know where we're heading, and we're going to get there in sprints or in steps to get there, and we'll commit resources to that, but we know where we're going. We don't know exactly how we're going to get there. We'll find that out along the way. That's a real mindset change, is to make the decision that we're going to head in this direction. It looks something like this, but it doesn't look exactly like that. And that is really the mindset that you need to adopt if you want to make faster, better decisions, rather than trying to have it all planned out in infinite detail at the front end. So that's about having clarity of purpose and an effective process. So it's very hard. It's easy to say that we're going to have an agile organization, but our decision-making process needs to match that. So here's a point where you need to reflect on. Let's think about how do we make decisions, and then does that environment suit this more? Let's make a decision. It appears to be heading in the right direction. These are the things we're going to be doing. But we'll be much more iterative in the way we implement and execute it, and might make many small decisions along the way. And how do we now create that mechanism moving forward? So first of all, you've got to understand the types of decisions that we're going to make. So it's and you need to be fit for purpose, and we need to also understand what risks are involved. So if we're going to make directionally right decisions that aren't necessarily the exact answers, we need to have an expectation that, okay, so for the types of decisions we're making, what decisions are we going to be making, and then what are the potential risks and impact of those, and then how we're going to mitigate those. And so we need to create a process that allows that to happen. So you need something about, okay, purpose, the types of decisions, the impact and risks, and then how do we create a process that makes that work. And we'll talk about that moving as we go now. So I like this, as I said, I did quite a bit of research in decision making, and there are many you can spend days and weeks and months looking at decision making and how to do it. But I landed on, I guess, an article from McKinsey that broke decisions down into 4 types, and there are 3 that are focused on. The other one is ad hoc decisions, but these are focusing on these common decision types that take place. They're big bet decisions, which is sort of low frequency, high risk and reward. Cross-cutting, these decisions involve, I guess, they cut across multiple stakeholders across an organisation. They're often tactical, still have a fair amount of risk to them, and they happen quite often. And then there are delegated decisions. These are decisions that you make, typically operational. They're higher frequency, but they're within a delegated responsibility. The risks are kind of low because they've been predetermined, and we're operating within that paradigm. I think the key thing here is to understand, and I'll provide some examples in a moment, that these decision types occur at every level of the organisation. So whether you are a CEO or you're a frontline operator, you will have some big bet decisions, and you'll have some delegated decisions, and you'll have some decisions that are cross-cutting. So this table is not meant to be definitive, and it'll be different for every organisation. But what I'm trying to do here is demonstrate that a big bet decision at an executive level could be procurement of a strategic software solution or operating system or something like that. For a team member, it could be a big bet decision. For a team member might be I want to do an MBA. I want to see if I can get some higher education funding support from the organisation. Because for me, that is a strategic decision for me. That is, I'm looking at my future and I'm making a big bet on if I do get these qualifications, then that's going to mean something for my organisation and it's going to mean something for me personally. And so similarly, on my day-to-day job, selling to a customer within standard terms, I'm a delegated to do that. I can make decisions and sales to do that. However, I might need to go up a level to get the discount within that are outside to get a volume discount, and so I might go to my team leader. Now, my team leader is delegated that responsibility to be able to give volume discounts. They have that authority to do so. At a higher level, things like capital allocations might be cross-cutting for expansion projects and hiring staff and those sorts of things. So think about, in order to create a better decision-making system, the first step is to understand what are the types of decisions we're making. What are those big decisions? What are those multiple stakeholder decisions? What are those delegated decisions that we're going to have? And what are those delegations going to look like? And so start to think about, okay, and what types of decisions we're going to be making. So for each of those types, you need to then declutter and streamline your process. So in order to do that is, once again, is who is the decision maker and who are the stakeholders? What is the criteria for making the decision? What information do we need to make the decision and where's that coming from? Time frames. So for these types of decisions, they could be, for instance, operational decisions might be made on a daily or weekly basis. Much bigger strategic decisions might take weeks or months or whatever. Part of the decision-making process has to also include how this thing is going to be implemented. How are we going to commit people and resources to that? It has to be part of the decision. We can't just decide we're going to do X, Y, Z. There needs to be some implementation plan that's committed to and agreed to. And also importantly, and often gets forgotten about, is how do we measure that? And we'll talk about each of these points as we go through. So knowing who the decision maker is, I think it's important, particularly in instances where there are multiple stakeholders and having really clear role clarity. So, and I've got here functional endorsers. So who the lawyers should be approving the law stuff, the marketing people, the marketing stuff, the pricing people, the pricing stuff. And the decision maker says, okay, everyone is happy with all of these things. Yes, we're going forward with this. It makes sense to do so. And rather than you find a lot of these committee decision makers is people start having opinions outside of their jurisdiction. So streamline process would be, I want you to approve, is this document fit with our legals? Does this pricing fit with our cost structure or whatever it is? So make sure that particularly for multiple decision makers, people stick to their remit of their role. Role clarity and role. So this person or people are the decision makers, and this is how we're going to make the decision and have it really clearly worked out. Now, for those delegated decisions, it's usually a single person's delegated to make that, and if within their delegated authority, they're able to make these decisions if these criteria are met. And so that's when we talk about the decision-making criteria. Is the decision you're making aligned to, I guess, firstly, your strategic purpose? And so that's about that robust debate we had at the start. Have we had a good discussion about this particular project, and is it aligned to where we're going? And then what is the purpose of this decision, and therefore what are the required decisions to be made? So in order to achieve the purpose, we need to approve these 2 or 3 things. There might be a whole lot of other stuff, but they shouldn't be cluttering up the decision-making process. Essentially, this is the decision we're making. So what is required for the decision to be made to meet the purpose of the decision? Having the right amount of data and information. So what data information is needed? So once again, be very specific up front is to, if I have these 4 or 5 things or 2 or 3 things or whatever, if I have these and they come in with this range and these numbers, this is what I need. No more, no less. That is enough to make the decision. We'll talk a little bit more about risk mitigation, but I think an important part is what, if you're making faster, better decisions, then part of that process has to be is how do we mitigate risk? And then what are the scenarios and actions and pivots that we might need to take, prepare and plan for? Now, often decisions are made and we don't necessarily have a thought through if it doesn't quite go to plan, what do we do? Now, in an agile organization, you have your North Star, which is the purpose, and then we're expecting to deviate and pivot at times to eventually get to where we're trying to get to. And that's part of the implementation process, having that decision making, think about how we're going to implement this and how we're going to execute this decision. Now, the trick here is to ensure that when we're setting our decision making criteria, we don't have too much data. So a big part of decision making is asking the question, is saying, you need to always be prepared to make the decision. So you should always be asking, can I make a decision now? What is preventing me from making a decision now? No matter how big the decision appears to be, if you have enough information or enough certainty to make a decision, if you have enough certainty to make a decision, then you should make a decision. And so I think back to, I've worked in a number of places in underwriting and in claims, and at the moment where, particularly in claims, at the moment where the claim can be accepted or denied, that takes place because we have enough information to accept or deny, and we don't need to keep on going. And so I think it's about saying, can I make a decision? Is it a no-brainer? And do I really need to follow this whole process, or can I take a shortcut and go straight to the decision making and say, everything's aligned, we can move forward, rather than necessarily going through the long, convoluted process if it's not necessary. And I think it's important. A lot of organizations, the process becomes the work, and we forget that our job is to actually make the decision. So when thinking about making a decision is, if you did have more data, would you make it? How might your decision change, and is it material? If you made a decision now versus later, what is the cost of delaying that decision? If my assumptions change by order of magnitude, 15, 20, 25%, how much impact does that have, and how material is it? It's not hugely material. If my assumptions don't change things much, then I don't need any greater fidelity. I can move forward. What's the impact of being wrong or partially right? So what's going to happen, and what mitigations do I have in place? If being half right is still better than no decision at all, then are we able to make a decision? Yes, we're happy to be half right, because that is a step forward and we're heading in the right direction, and we can iterate and pivot moving forward if we have to. So always be asking, can I make a decision now, as opposed to following the process to the end. Your process should include essentially a decision diamond, if you like, saying, can you make a decision now? And if it's yes, then make the decision. You don't have to follow the process to the end if it's not required. So it's a trap for many organizations. I think one of the big things as we see, this analysis paralysis and need too much data. I think what COVID has shown us is that you can make decisions with imperfect data or limited data, and if they are directionally right, and you have an expectation we might have to change course, then you can move forward. The chart on the left shows, this is, so one form of decision making is I was using like a normal distribution, a probability distribution, and you might have in this instance, it's the graph shows a 90% confidence interval. What this shows is that at the early part of the data coming into your distribution is the improvement in confidence increases quite rapidly, and then the improvement is very slow, to the point where beyond about 25 to 30 data points, the change in the fidelity of the information is very small. So you don't, at this point here, you can say, I have enough information, I have 15 data points, or 20 or 25 data points. I don't need any more, because even if I get another 100, the confidence level is not going to improve by any more. And so you have enough data to move forward. So think about, you don't always need more information. It's sometimes about having the right data and knowing that we have enough data, it's directionally right, we can move on. Particularly if there are time constraints and availability of data is hard to get, you'll find that often those early data sets will be good enough. Risk mitigation, how accurate does the decision need to be? If we're partially wrong or right, what's the impact of doing nothing, and what is the impact of not being 100% right. Understand those risks, and as part of the decision-making process, I would suggest that you say, well, in this instance, that we'll do this, and think about in advance what those actions might be, rather than waiting for more data to say, well, we need greater certainty of this. Well, if the sensitivity analysis shows that there's not a huge deal, much change, then you can move forward. And then once again, always measure and track the outcome results, and know, and compare back to your assumptions. If you start to look at your assumptions and the way you made decisions, it will actually improve and advance your ability to make decisions moving forward. There are a number of traps in decision making. We've spoken a bit about analysis paralysis and the need for perfect decision. I think so. There's some tricks here. Have some real deadlines, focus the mind. So think about having some drop dead dates for data, and triangulate your data sources. So rather than getting more of one particular data set, you might have, for instance, we've spoken about gut feel, we spoke about evidence-based decision making, and we spoke about consensus. Now, you might not have enough evidence, but your intuition tells you, and that things are this makes sense to me, and your discussions with other people suggest things ain't right. So whilst there might not be enough evidence, you essentially triangulate 3 data sets to say, you know what, this decision makes sense. So you might have having multiple data sources from different sources that say directionally the same thing is probably a better way of making decisions than relying on a single data set and asking for more data or more fidelity in the information. So create boundaries around the data. So this is how much data we need. These are drop dead dates, and I'm going to triangulate these sources. Have a plausibility threshold. So and it can't be 100%. It needs to be once I get to this level of fidelity, then we're happy to move forward. And particularly if I have 2 or 3 things saying the same thing. For bigger decisions, often it's smart just to break it down. It might be there might be 10 criteria, and if we get 8 of the criteria directionally right, then even though we haven't got data for these, the risk is such that we can move forward. So avoid analysis paralysis and think of ways to test enable you to move forward with limited data sets and create a level of confidence by forcing yourselves to do that. We spoke about upward delegation, and I think the key here is it's about this is for controlling managers to recognise that you're a controlling manager and that these decisions can be made lower down the organisation. My role is to coach and help people make decisions. Similarly, if you're delegating the authority to make a decision, but you're uncomfortable, then don't defer the decision up the line and get your boss to make the decision for you. Seek out help, get guidance and get coaching, but make the call yourself, and your supervisor or manager should be doing the same thing. Is how do I help my team make better decisions and coach them to do that, rather than taking everything on board and making decisions that are actually the delegation of someone else. So think about if you're leading people and you find that you're making decisions that they could be making, then coach, train, teach, help them make those decisions so you can concentrate on the other decisions that you're delegated to make. Cognitive bias. We'll talk to this in a minute, but I think that the key thing here is think about a lot of this comes down to intuitive decision making, but there are other forms of bias. Look at your decision and say, okay, don't fall into the trap of analysis paralysis of doing this, but you need to challenge your beliefs or your initial ideas or your initial thoughts. So say what prove is there a bias at play here, and what data set or information potentially proves that wrong, and just to once again mitigate the risk of those biases. And I'll talk a little bit more about biases in a moment. It's all well and good decisions being made, but a part of the decision-making process has to be getting commitment from those that are involved, those stakeholders, to the decision, including how it's going to be implemented, the objectives, and how it's going to be measured, and making and a commitment to the accountability of this decision. You often get decisions accepted but not committed to. So we find, in many instances in organisations, one of the reasons why programs don't achieve their potential is because there hasn't been that commitment to the execution, implementation, and then the measurement thereafter. Often decisions are made, we get a green light on our scorecard and we move on, and we're not held to account as to achieving the outcomes of that. And so decision making is as much about making a decision, it's about the accountability and committing to the decision has been made. I think it's important. An important part of making better decisions is about getting commitment and accountability to those decisions as well. So decision-making biases. So intuition can be fantastic, and there are many examples where, if you read books like Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, where that 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours experience is as good as, if not better than, some algorithms. That said, intuition can be no better than the flip of the coin, particularly in certain circumstances. So intuitive decisions and heuristics, they're mental shortcuts and rules of thumb. My answer to that is it's another data set, it's another data source. If your intuition is one data set, this makes sense to me, my experience tells me this makes sense. What does the data support that? And so just use it as another data set. Don't use it as necessarily the single decision-making criteria. So what are some of the decision biases that we have? Anchoring. So this is one where you have some pre-existing information. Often the first bit of information you see and you anchor to that, and that becomes your bias tends towards that early information that you received. Framing is an interesting one. This is a bias where, depending on how the situation is framed, you make your decision versus then the information itself. So if, for example, someone overemphasizes the positive aspects of something, you may overlook the negatives, and so it's framed in a positive light. Therefore, you see it in a positive light. Where that same data set can be framed in a negative light, where someone and you likewise your bias will be negative. So think about how something's being pitched to you, and are you forming a bias based on how it's framed, rather than the data itself? That's when, for us evidence-based decision makers, that's when we get out our calculators and go, hang on, you're overselling this based on the data that's in front of me. The availability heuristic. So this is a shortcut for things that that come to mind easily, come to mind readily. Now you often find this, I find this when I talk to people, say, well, talk to me about this. So tell me about this particular situation. People go, oh, well, sometimes this, and this happens. And people have a very vivid memory of an outlier or something that's particularly different. And then you say, well, when was the last time that happened? And they say, oh, that was about 2 or 3 years ago. Oh, so most of the time that doesn't happen. Oh, no, it doesn't. But your bias can be towards those exceptions because they stand out, not necessarily the most common or whatever. So be particularly aware of that, is that things aren't forming a bias in your mind because they stood out as opposed to being necessarily the most likely. We spoke about confirmation bias. So this is where we have initial decisions or beliefs, and we then start to ignore or don't see other data sets that maybe don't necessarily fit our so we're of the belief that a price point of $99.99 is best for whatever reason, and we only ever see data set that proves that. We ignore subconsciously data sets that counter that view. Commitment escalations is an interesting one. This is where a decision is made that may not be working, may not be wrong, but because we've committed time, resources, and energy to this, we're going to stick to it. We're going to stick to this. Hell or high water, we're going to stick with this to the point where it might be irrational to do so. So sometimes you just have to accept a loser as a loser and move on, or pivot, or change. And so that commitment escalation is a bias. We've made this decision, we're going to stick to it regardless. Hindsight bias, and this is an interesting one, is people sort of intuitively believe that they knew the answer, or they expected something to happen, or they predicted a result, but they only found out about it after it actually happened. And so this can do one of two things. It can give you an overconfidence in your ability to forecast the future, but it can also limit your ability to learn from past failures because you have this overconfidence in your beliefs. So be aware of these. Now, I fully recommend just spending some time on Google looking at cognitive biases and heuristics, because these are just some common ones, but there are many there, and it's quite interesting and insightful as to how your mind, particularly for us, those of us that are intuitive decision makers, how some of these biases can influence you without you even realizing it. So it's well worth it just to be aware of them, and then being able to encounter those moving forward. So some examples, I think remote working is a great example of how decision-making in recent times, many organisations, and I'm not saying that it's not representative here, or maybe organisations were very much avoided remote working. There are a lot of those there was lots of decision biases and negative beliefs around what working from home might do. People would be less productive, people want to work from home, etc., etc., etc. And so there are fears and beliefs of what would happen. I think that's been shown to not necessarily be correct. All those organisations that said, yes, we do embrace working from home, however, we need to have the best solution, that sort of thing in place. So what we've shown is that in recent times, that yes, Zoom was a bit, and still is at times, a bit clunky. The platforms we're using can get better. However, through their use, we're getting better at using them. Also, through our use, the providers of these services are seeing what works and what doesn't, and improving their services. So that agile, let's make a decision that's directionally right. We need to move people home. People need to work from home, and there's less commuting time. There's a whole bunch of good stuff. There's also some challenges which we need to work through. But let's work through those challenges, because this is the right decision to make. The other one, I think, and I don't have an opinion or an answer on this, but it's about this sort of analysis paralysis sort of question, and what's the right information, and what's the right onus of proof, if you like, for a decision to be made. Taking 1 to 3 days or longer for a diagnostic PCR test versus testing people, screening tests, which take 15 to 45 minutes, but the accuracy level is a lot less. If a vaccine doesn't come, but I've heard lots of positive reports today about vaccines, is what would the best solution be? Is the higher resolution but longer, or the faster, quicker turnaround to know that if people are positive, then we can move them, we can quickly isolate them quicker. Yes, we will miss a few people, but if it's much cheaper and we're testing more frequently, then we're more likely to catch them next time around. And so that thought process of which is the best testing to have in place, and there are pros and cons for both, but I think it's an interesting one to look at this. What, in terms of data, what is the right amount of information? Is it the less accurate faster, or the more accurate longer, and which way to go? And so that's a debate that's out there, and many of you might have some opinions on that as well. So I'd like to sort of wrap up, and so what I've essentially would like to, I don't often have things that come out of a perfect 10, but this one actually did come out as a perfect 10. I usually don't trust people that have perfect 10s, but today, for this webinar, I think from what we've discussed today, I think there are 10 essentials for faster, better decision making. So think about them. You need to, in decluttering and streamlining the process, know the purpose of the decision and quite clearly, and have a robust debate around that for those bigger decisions as to what is the purpose of the decision, and then what are the roles of the decision makers, stakeholders, and information providers. So rather than get bogged down in the bureaucracy of who's making the decisions, decide up front who the decision maker is and the roles to the others, and that will speed things up greatly, and how that decision is made and how we communicate those. Empower people to make those decisions. So look objectively at the decision being made, look at the types of decision being made, and what are the impacts and risks of those. And within your organisation, who actually, based on organisational level, can make this decision. And you'll be surprised how many decisions can be made at lower levels, freeing up senior people. So how many decisions require less information or less level of fidelity for a decision to be made, and then you can drop those down and delegate to people within those, and define those parameters within which those decisions can be made. For those people that you've now given additional decision-making powers to, or those that are not necessarily comfortable making decisions, provide coaching, support, and encourage. Make it safe for people to make decisions. And if they're delegated a decision, then the risks are accepted. They need to make those decisions and encourage them to make those. But then review if the decision made that wasn't great. How could it be better for next time? And coach and learn from that. And that comes down to defining decision-making criteria. It's really important at the front to say these are the hurdle rates, these expectations. If the data shows this, then we make the decision. So let's not put off making a decision. Let's make a decision because we have enough information and it's over those hurdle rates. Now let's move forward. So I said, look to make the decision. If you can make the decision there and then, make the decision. If everything's in place, you don't go down all the steps. Go to the decision maker, explain the situation, and get the decision made. Or if there's an escalation if you want a short circuit, maybe you build that in as well. Avoid decision-making traps. We spoke of those. So analysis paralysis, cognitive biases, making sure that people are making decisions within their delegation. And the big one about getting commitment to those decisions and implementing them. When decisions are made, expect them to not always be 100% right. Expect them to be just directionally right, and that as part of the execution, we're going to adjust and pivot at times or course correct, call it what you will, to get to where we're trying to get to. The thing is the purpose and how we get there, the decision to put in place a process that gets us there and accepting that things might need to change. And that way, decisions can be made faster and quicker, and you take a much more agile approach to doing it. Be accountable and gain commitment. So once again, if we're empowering people, we're making them accountable, and we're getting people commitment to do those things. Now, what you'll find is that by empowering people and making them accountable actually sharpens the mind, and they will be very coachable and will learn very quickly. So give people their head, let them make decisions, and if you're a manager, then help them. And if you've been delegated that responsibility, then recognize that, okay, I'm uncomfortable with this, but seek out the help and support you need to do that. And next, I think that the other thing is make the decisions, measure the results and the outcomes, because that is your feedback loop into how well the decisions are made and our ability to pivot and move on. And so those are, I think, so if you think about it, so my call to action, if you like, is to look at how you made decisions in the past. Look at some of those fast, quick decisions you've had to make in recent times, and then think about the steps here we've put in place and redesign and reframe your decision-making process to do that. You'll find that if you're able to do that, your decision-making will become faster and will become better, and your organisation will become equipped to be more agile and execute things in a way that you'll probably find that your programs